In the middle of the night, my little granddaughter knocked on my door. "Grandma, me and Daddy found something terrible in Mommy's drawer. A man tied him up and now I need help. I just made a call. It's time to execute the plan." Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. The sound of tiny fists pounding on my bedroom door at 2:30 in the morning would have startled anyone. But when I heard Natalie's trembling voice calling Grandma Deborah, "Please wake up," my heart didn't just skip a beat, it practically stopped. I threw on my robe and opened the door to find my 8-year-old granddaughter standing there in her pink pajamas, tears streaming down her face. Her father Jason stood behind her, his face pale as a ghost, holding what looked like a manila envelope. "Natalie, sweetheart, what's wrong?" I knelt down to her level, brushing the tears from her cheeks. "Grandma, we found something terrible in Mommy's drawer," she whispered, her voice shaking. "There's a bad man who's being mean to her. He tied Daddy up somehow and now I need help." I looked up at Jason, confusion and fear battling in my chest. "What is she talking about?" Jason's hands were trembling as he held up the envelope. "Deborah, we need to talk. Right now. What we found. It's worse than anything I could have imagined." I ushered them into my living room, my mind racing. For months, I'd watched my daughter Claire grow increasingly distant and anxious. She'd been canceling family dinners, avoiding eye contact, and when she did visit, she seemed like she was constantly looking over her shoulder. I'd attributed it to work stress, maybe marriage problems, but deep down I knew something was seriously wrong. "Show me," I said, settling Natalie on the couch beside me. Jason's voice was barely above a whisper. Natalie couldn't sleep tonight. She went to get a glass of water and heard Claire crying in their bedroom. When she peeked in, Claire was on the phone with someone, and she was begging them not to hurt her family. My blood ran cold. "Go on." After Claire finally fell asleep, I couldn't rest. Something about the whole situation felt off. Claire's been acting strange for months, jumpy, secretive, always checking her phone. He paused, looking guilty. I searched through her things. He opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of photographs and printed emails. Even in the dim light of my living room lamp, I could see they were threatening in nature. Photos of our house, of Natalie's school, of Jason leaving work. "The emails are worse," Jason continued, his voice breaking. "Someone's been threatening to hurt Natalie and me if Claire doesn't do what they want. They know everything about our daily routines, where we shop, where Natalie plays. And they're demanding money. Lots of it." I felt my hands clench into fists. How long has this been going on? Based on the dates on these emails, at least 8 months. Maybe longer. Jason ran his hands through his hair. "Deborah, I feel so stupid. I thought Claire was having an affair or something. I never imagined." Natalie's small voice interrupted us. "Grandma, is someone going to hurt Mommy?" I pulled her closer, my mind already working. "No, sweetheart. No one is going to hurt your Mommy. Not while I'm around." But even as I comforted my granddaughter, I was studying the documents more carefully. The language in the emails was too familiar, too personal. This wasn't some random extortionist. This was someone who knew intimate details about our family. "Jason, have you confronted Claire about this?" He shook his head. "I wanted to talk to you first. You know her better than anyone. And honestly, I'm scared. What if confronting her makes things worse? What if this person follows through on their threats?" I stood up, my decision already made. "Give me your phone." "What? Why?" "Because I need to make a call. Jason, what I'm about to tell you might shock you, but I want you to listen carefully." I walked to the window, looking out at the dark street. I've been expecting this call for months. Both Jason and Natalie stared at me in confusion. I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to reveal would change everything. "You see, Claire told me about this situation 3 months ago. She made me promise not to interfere, not to tell you, because she was terrified of what might happen to you and Natalie." I turned back to face them. But she also knew that if things got worse, if the threats escalated, I would need to act. Jason's mouth fell open. "You knew? You knew all along." "I know my daughter, Jason. Claire is strong, but she's also stubborn. She thought she could handle this on her own, protect her family by keeping you in the dark. But I've been watching, waiting, gathering information." I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. The person who's been threatening Claire isn't some stranger, Jason. It's someone much closer to home than you think. As I pressed the call button, I looked directly at my son-in-law. It's your brother Marcus. The color drained completely from Jason's face. That's impossible. Marcus would never. Marcus discovered something about Claire's past, something she's been ashamed of for years. And he's been using it to destroy your marriage and steal money from your family to pay his gambling debts. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Detective Morrison speaking. David, it's Deborah. It's time to execute the plan. The silence that followed my phone call was deafening. Jason stared at me as if I'd grown a second head, while Natalie had fallen asleep curled up against my side, exhausted from the emotional turmoil of the night. Your brother, I repeated quietly, not wanting to wake her. Marcus has been blackmailing Claire for 8 months. Jason's voice was hollow. That's impossible, Deborah. Marcus loves Claire. He was the best man at our wedding. He's Natalie's godfather. I gently lifted Natalie and carried her to my guest bedroom, tucking her under the soft quilt my mother had made years ago. When I returned to the living room, Jason was hunched over the threatening emails, reading them with fresh eyes. Look at the language, I said, settling into my chair across from him. Notice how the writer knows that you take Natalie to soccer practice every Tuesday and Thursday. How they know Claire's middle name is Rose, something she never uses. How they know about your father's old truck that you keep in the garage. Jason's hands were shaking as he read. These details. Only family would know these things. Exactly. I leaned forward, my voice gentle but firm. 3 months ago, Claire showed up at my door at midnight just like tonight. She was hysterical, barely coherent. It took me 2 hours to get the whole story out of her. I closed my eyes, remembering that night. Claire had been so broken, so ashamed, clutching a similar envelope of threats and photos. She told me about the accident. Jason looked up sharply. What accident? I sighed deeply. This was the part I dreaded having to explain. When Claire was 19, before she met you, she was driving home from work during a terrible thunderstorm. She hit a man who was walking along the highway. He was drunk, wearing dark clothes, and it was impossible to see him in time. Jason's face went white. She never told me about any accident. Because she was terrified, Jason. She panicked and drove away. The man survived, but he was injured. Claire spent months agonizing over what she'd done. She eventually tracked down the man through hospital records and anonymously paid all his medical bills. She's been sending his family money every Christmas for 15 years. I could see Jason struggling to process this information. But that doesn't explain. Marcus found out, I continued. He hired a private investigator last year to look into Claire's background. He told Claire he was doing it to surprise you for your anniversary, to create some kind of family tree project. But really, he was looking for dirt. The pieces were falling into place in Jason's mind. I could see the recognition dawning on his face. Marcus has been gambling again, I said. Heavy gambling. He owes money to some very dangerous people. When his investigator found out about the hit and run, Marcus saw an opportunity. Jason stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. So he's been threatening to expose Claire unless she gives him money. Not just money, Jason. He's been systematically destroying your marriage. Think about it, when did Claire start becoming distant? When did she stop wanting to host family gatherings? About 8 months ago, Jason whispered. Right after Marcus started having financial problems. He's been feeding you lies about Claire. Remember when you told me you thought she might be having an affair? Where did that idea come from? Jason's face crumpled. Marcus. He kept making these little comments about how Claire was acting suspicious, how she was probably keeping secrets from me. He said he was just looking out for me as my brother. The manipulation was even more extensive than I'd initially realized. Marcus hadn't just been extorting money from Claire. He'd been poisoning Jason's mind against his own wife. But why didn't Claire just tell me the truth? Jason asked, his voice breaking. About the accident, about Marcus, about everything? I felt my heart ache for both my daughter and son-in-law. Because she was ashamed, and because Marcus convinced her that you'd never forgive her. He told her that if the truth came out, not only would you divorce her, but you'd take Natalie away. He said you'd never let her see her daughter again. Jason sank back onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. My own brother. How could he do this to us? Addiction makes people do terrible things, Jason. But that doesn't excuse what Marcus has done to this family. I reached over and squeezed his shoulder. The important thing now is that we stop him. You said you've been planning something with Detective Morrison? I nodded. David Morrison and I go way back. I used to work with him when I was a victim's advocate at the courthouse. When Claire first told me what was happening, I knew we needed professional help to handle this properly. What kind of plan? We've been documenting everything. Every threat, every payment Claire has made, every lie Marcus has told. David has been building a case against Marcus for extortion, blackmail, and harassment. I stood up and walked to my desk, pulling out a thick folder. We've also been investigating his gambling debts. Some of the people he owes money to are connected to organized crime. Jason's eyes widened. You mean this could be even more dangerous than we thought? Marcus is desperate, Jason. Desperate people do unpredictable things. That's why we've been so careful, so methodical. We can't afford to make a mistake. I opened the folder and showed him photographs of Marcus entering illegal gambling establishments, records of his debts, and transcripts of recorded phone calls where he'd threatened Claire. How did you get all this? David has contacts everywhere. And I've been using my old skills from my advocacy days. You learn a lot about gathering evidence when you're helping abuse victims build cases against their attackers. Jason stared at the evidence, shaking his head in disbelief. All this time I thought I was losing my wife. I thought our marriage was falling apart. Your marriage was being sabotaged, Jason, by someone who was supposed to love and protect your family. I closed the folder. But now we're going to stop him. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text message. Detective Morrison. Everything is in place. Ready when you are. I showed Jason the message. Tomorrow we spring the trap. The next morning I made pancakes for Natalie while Jason called in sick to work. We'd agreed that everything needed to appear normal while we prepared for what was coming. Natalie seemed to sense something was happening, but children are remarkably resilient when the adults around them project calm. Is Mommy going to be okay? She asked, drowning her pancakes in syrup. Your mommy is going to be just fine, sweetheart, I assured her, smoothing down her hair. Sometimes grown-ups have problems that take time to fix, but we're fixing this one today. After breakfast, I drove Natalie to school myself, something I rarely did. As we pulled up to the building, I noticed Marcus's car parked across the street. My blood ran cold. Natalie, I want you to go straight to your classroom and stay there until Daddy picks you up. Okay? Don't go anywhere with anyone else, not even Uncle Marcus. She looked confused. Why not Uncle Marcus? I forced a smile. Just because today is a special day, and Daddy wants to pick you up himself. As I watched her walk into the school building, I pulled out my phone and called Detective Morrison. David, Marcus is watching the school. I see him, came the reply. We've had an unmarked car on him since yesterday. He's getting desperate. What do you mean? His gambling debts came due yesterday. According to our sources, he owes $50,000 to some very unpleasant people. They've given him until tonight to pay up. My stomach clenched. So he's going to pressure Claire even harder today. That's what we're counting on. Is she ready for this? I thought about my daughter, who had agreed to our plan with a mixture of terror and relief. After months of living in fear, she was finally ready to fight back. She's ready. When I arrived back home, Claire was already there, sitting at my kitchen table with Jason. She looked like she hadn't slept in months, which was probably close to the truth. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she'd lost at least 15 pounds since this nightmare began. Mom, she said, standing up to hug me. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you everything from the beginning. I held her tight, feeling how fragile she'd become. You were trying to protect your family, sweetheart. That's what mothers do. But I made everything worse. I let Marcus poison Jason against me. I let him turn my own husband into a stranger. Jason reached for her hand. Claire, I should have trusted you. I should have known something was wrong instead of believing his lies. Marcus is very good at manipulation, I said, sitting down with them. He's had years to perfect it. Do you remember when he convinced your father to co-sign that loan for his first business venture? Jason nodded grimly. Dad lost his retirement savings when Marcus defaulted. And what did Marcus do afterward? He blamed Dad for not reading the fine print. Said Dad was irresponsible with money. Classic manipulation, I explained. Marcus takes advantage of people's trust, then makes them feel like they're the ones at fault when things go wrong. He's been doing the same thing to Claire. Claire's voice was barely a whisper. He told me I was a murderer. He said that man I hit could have died, and I would have been responsible for destroying his family. He made me feel like I deserved to be punished. I felt anger surge through me. Claire, you were 19 years old driving in a storm. It was an accident. And you took responsibility for it. You've been helping that family for 15 years. But Marcus said. Marcus is a liar and a predator, I said firmly. He found your vulnerability and exploited it. That's what predators do. Jason was reading through more of the threatening emails. Look at this one from last week. He's not just demanding money anymore. He's telling Claire to convince me to remortgage the house. I leaned over to read the message. Your husband trusts you less every day. Soon he'll be ready to believe you're stealing from him too. When I suggest he check the finances, he'll discover what a liar you really are. Unless you get me that $50,000, I'll make sure Jason divorces you and takes your daughter away forever. He's been planning this for months, Claire said, tears streaming down her face. Every argument Jason and I had, every time Jason questioned something I did, Marcus was behind it. He's been destroying my marriage piece by piece. Not anymore, I said, checking my watch. David should be calling any minute. As if summoned by my words, my phone rang. Deborah, we're ready. Is Claire prepared for the call? Yes, she's ready. I put the phone on speaker. Claire, Detective Morrison has been recording Marcus's threats for weeks. We have enough evidence to arrest him, but we need one more piece. We need him to explicitly threaten violence. Claire's hands were shaking. What if he actually hurts someone? He won't get the chance, Detective Morrison assured her. We'll have him in custody within minutes of him making the threat. But we need this final piece of evidence to make sure he goes away for a long time. What do I have to do? Call him and tell him you can't get any more money. Tell him Jason is getting suspicious and you're afraid he's going to find out everything. Marcus will panic, and when he does, he'll reveal his true nature. I squeezed Claire's hand. You can do this, sweetheart. You're stronger than you know. Claire took a deep breath and dialed Marcus's number. Jason moved closer to her, finally understanding that he needed to be her support system instead of her interrogator. Marcus answered on the second ring. It's about time you called. Do you have my money? Marcus, I can't do this anymore, Claire said, her voice trembling but determined. Jason is starting to ask questions. He wanted to know why I withdrew $5,000 last week. Then you better think of a good lie. You're good at lying, aren't you, Claire? I can't keep lying to my husband, and I can't get you any more money. Jason has been watching our accounts. The change in Marcus's voice was immediate and chilling. You don't get to decide when this ends, you murderous bitch. I decide. And if you think you can cut me off, you're stupider than I thought. Claire looked at me, fear evident in her eyes, but I nodded encouragingly. I'm done, Marcus. I'm going to tell Jason everything. The hell you are. Marcus screamed into the phone. If you say one word to my brother, I'll make sure that hit-and-run victim knows exactly who destroyed his life. I'll make sure the police arrest you for leaving the scene of an accident. And when they do, I'll be right there to comfort Jason and help him get full custody of Natalie. You can't. I can do whatever I want. And if that doesn't shut you up, maybe something will happen to that precious daughter of yours. Kids have accidents all the time. They fall downstairs, they get hit by cars, they disappear from playgrounds. The room went completely silent. Even through the phone, we could hear Marcus breathing heavily, realizing he'd gone too far. Claire's voice was steady now, powered by a mother's fury. Did you just threaten my daughter? I didn't mean. You just threatened to hurt an 8-year-old child, Claire said coldly. Your own goddaughter. The line went dead. Within seconds, Detective Morrison called back. We got it all. Units are moving in now. I looked at my daughter, seeing a strength in her eyes that had been missing for months. "It's over, Claire. You're free." 27 minutes after Marcus threatened Natalie, Detective Morrison called to confirm the arrest. We got him at his apartment. He was packing a suitcase, probably planning to run. The gambling debts finally caught up with him. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. What happens now? He's being charged with extortion, blackmail, criminal threats, and harassment. Given the threats against a child, the judge won't be sympathetic about bail. He's looking at serious prison time. Claire was crying, but for the first time in months they were tears of relief. Jason held her close, whispering apologies for not believing her, for not protecting her from his own brother. "There's something else," Detective Morrison continued. "When we searched Marcus's apartment, we found evidence that Claire isn't his only victim. He's been running similar schemes on at least 3 other people. We found files on each of them, including background investigations and psychological profiles." My blood ran cold. "You mean he's done this before?" "Multiple times. He seems to target people who have something shameful in their past, something they'd pay to keep secret. We found files dating back 5 years. I thought about all the people who might have suffered because of Marcus's greed and manipulation. Will they be contacted? We're working with the prosecutor's office to reach out to his other victims. With their testimony and the evidence we've gathered, Marcus won't see freedom for a very long time." After Detective Morrison hung up, the 3 of us sat in my kitchen in stunned silence. The threat that had loomed over our family for 8 months was finally gone, but the emotional damage would take time to heal. "I need to pick up Natalie," Jason said eventually. "She's probably wondering why I'm late." "I'll come with you," Claire said quickly. "I need to see her. I need to hold my daughter." "We'll all go," I decided. As a family. The drive to Natalie's school was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet rather than the tense silence we'd all grown accustomed to. For the first time in months, Claire wasn't constantly checking her phone for threatening messages. Jason wasn't watching her with suspicious eyes, and I wasn't wondering when the other shoe would drop. When we arrived at the school, Natalie came running out of the building with her usual 8-year-old energy, her backpack bouncing behind her. "Mommy!" she squealed, throwing herself into Claire's arms. "You're here too." Claire held her daughter tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I'm here, baby. Mommy's here. Why are you crying? Are you still sad?" Claire looked up at Jason and me, then back at her daughter. "No, sweetheart. Mommy's not sad anymore. These are happy tears." "Happy tears are silly," Natalie declared with the matter-of-fact wisdom of childhood. "If you're happy, you should smile instead." So Claire smiled, and for the first time in months it reached her eyes. That evening, after we'd explained to Natalie that Uncle Marcus wouldn't be visiting anymore, because he'd made some bad choices, Jason and I found ourselves alone on my back porch while Claire helped Natalie with her homework inside. "I don't know how to thank you," Jason said, staring out at my small garden. "If you hadn't been watching out for Claire, if you hadn't put together that plan." "You don't need to thank me," I replied. "Claire is my daughter. Natalie is my granddaughter. Protecting family is what we do. But I should have protected them. I'm Claire's husband. I should have known something was wrong." I turned to face him. "Jason, Marcus spent months manipulating you. He used your love for Claire against you, made you doubt your own instincts. That's not your fault. I listened to him instead of my wife. I believed his lies instead of trusting the woman I married. Because he's your brother. We expect the people we love to have our best interests at heart. Marcus exploited that trust." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "But now you know. Now you've seen what manipulation looks like. You'll never fall for it again." Jason was quiet for a long moment. "Claire told me about the accident today. The whole story." I waited, knowing he needed to process this information in his own time. "She was just a kid," he continued. 19 years old, terrified, driving in a storm. She made a mistake, but she spent 15 years trying to make it right. How could Marcus use something like that against her? Because predators don't see people as human beings, I explained. They see weaknesses to exploit, vulnerabilities to manipulate. Marcus saw Claire's guilt and shame, and he used it to control her. She's been sending that family money every Christmas for 15 years. Jason said, shaking his head. Every year. She insists we donate to that children's charity instead of buying expensive gifts. I always thought she was just being generous. She was trying to balance the scales, I said gently. She couldn't undo what happened, but she could try to make sure that family never suffered financially because of her mistake. And Marcus called her a murderer. He made her feel like a monster for an accident that happened when she was barely an adult. I felt anger rise in my chest again. Marcus is skilled at finding people's deepest shame and twisting it into a weapon. That's what makes him so dangerous. How did you know? Jason asked suddenly. How did you know it was Marcus before we even found the evidence? I smiled grimly. Because I've been watching him for years. Marcus has always been a user, Jason. Even when you were kids, he was manipulating situations to his advantage. Remember when he convinced you to take the blame for breaking your mother's vase? I was 8. He said Mom wouldn't be as mad at me because I was younger. Exactly. He was already learning how to use other people's emotions against them. When I saw how Claire was acting, how your marriage was struggling, and then I noticed Marcus was having financial problems at the same time, it wasn't hard to put the pieces together. So you've been investigating him for months? I've been watching him for years, I corrected. But yes, once Claire told me what was happening, I started gathering evidence. I knew we'd need more than just her word against his. Jason shook his head in amazement. You're incredible, Deborah. I had no idea you were capable of something like this. Never underestimate a protective mother, I said with a smile. Or grandmother. When someone threatens our family, we become very creative in our responses. Through the window, I could see Claire helping Natalie with her math homework, both of them laughing at something funny in the textbook. For the first time in months, my daughter looked relaxed, unburdened by the weight of Marcus's threats. They're going to be okay, Jason said, following my gaze. Yes, I agreed. They are. You all are. What about Marcus? Will he try to retaliate somehow? I shook my head. Marcus is a coward. He only attacks people he perceives as weak or vulnerable. Now that he's facing serious criminal charges, he'll be focused on trying to save himself. Besides, Detective Morrison assures me that Marcus will be in custody for a very long time. As we sat there watching my family begin to heal, I reflected on the past 8 months. I'd watched my daughter suffer in silence, my son-in-law grow suspicious and distant, and my granddaughter worry about tensions she couldn't understand. The urge to intervene had been almost overwhelming at times, but I'd known that acting too quickly could make things worse. Patience had been the key. Patience and preparation. And now finally justice had been served. 3 days after Marcus's arrest, Jason's parents called an emergency family meeting. I wasn't surprised. Harold and Margaret had always been protective of their sons, sometimes to the point of enabling Marcus's worst behaviors. I suspected they were about to ask us to drop the charges or find some way to minimize the consequences for their older son. The meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon at Harold and Margaret's house. Claire didn't want to go, but I convinced her it was necessary. We need to face this head-on, I told her. Running away won't solve anything, and they deserve to know the truth about what Marcus did. Jason's parents lived in the same house where he and Marcus had grown up, a modest 2-story home with a carefully maintained garden. Margaret answered the door, her eyes red from crying. She'd always been proud of both her sons, and Marcus's arrest had shattered her world. "Oh, Claire," she said, immediately pulling my daughter into a hug. "I'm so sorry about all of this confusion." Confusion. As if Marcus's 8 months of systematic abuse was simply a misunderstanding. Harold was waiting in the living room, his face grim. He'd aged considerably in the past few days, the stress of his son's arrest weighing heavily on him. "Sit down," he said curtly. "We need to talk." Jason took Claire's hand as they settled on the couch. I chose a chair across from Harold, meeting his gaze directly. I could see the anger simmering beneath his controlled exterior. "I've spoken with Marcus's lawyer," Harold began without preamble. "He says the charges against him are very serious. Extortion, blackmail, criminal threats. These aren't the actions of the son we raised." "No," I agreed calmly. "They're the actions of a desperate gambling addict who was willing to destroy his own family to pay his debts." Margaret gasped. "Marcus doesn't have a gambling problem." He's had some business setbacks, but… Margaret, I interrupted gently. Marcus owes $50,000 to illegal gambling operations. The police found evidence of this when they arrested him. Harold's jaw tightened. Even if that's true, it doesn't justify destroying our family. Claire, you could have come to us. We could have helped Marcus get treatment, worked something out. Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. He threatened to hurt Natalie. Marcus would never hurt his goddaughter, Margaret said firmly. He loves that little girl. He threatened to make her disappear, Claire continued, her voice growing stronger. He said children have accidents all the time. Those were his exact words. The room fell silent. Even Harold seemed shocked by this revelation. That's not the Marcus we know, Margaret said weakly. I leaned forward. That's exactly who Marcus is when he's desperate. This isn't the first time he's done something like this, Margaret. The police found evidence that he's been blackmailing other people for years. That's impossible, Harold said, but his voice lacked conviction. Jason finally spoke up. Dad, I heard the recording. I heard my own brother threaten to hurt my daughter. There's no defending that. Family should stick together, Harold said desperately. We work through problems together. We don't send each other to prison. Marcus stopped being family the moment he threatened Natalie, I replied firmly. Family protects each other. Marcus was destroying Claire and Jason's marriage, terrorizing my daughter, and putting my granddaughter in danger. Margaret was crying openly now. But what about his future? A felony conviction will ruin his life. What about Claire's future? I asked. What about Natalie's? Marcus was systematically destroying their lives for 8 months. Where was your concern for their future? Harold stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. There has to be another way. Some kind of compromise. The time for compromise was before Marcus threatened a child, Jason said, his voice harder than I'd ever heard it. Dad, I know you love him, but Marcus made his choices. He has to face the consequences. He's sick, Margaret pleaded. If he really does have a gambling addiction, he needs treatment, not prison. He can get treatment in prison, I said bluntly. But first, he needs to be held accountable for what he's done. Harold turned back to face us, his expression desperate. Deborah, you have influence with that detective. Surely you could ask him to reduce the charges. I felt my temper flare. You want me to ask Detective Morrison to go easy on the man who spent 8 months terrorizing my family? The man who threatened to hurt my granddaughter? We're asking you to show mercy, Margaret said through her tears. I showed mercy by not handling this myself, I replied coldly. I showed mercy by involving the police instead of taking matters into my own hands. Claire looked up at me in surprise. Mom, what do you mean? I met her gaze steadily. I mean that there were other ways to deal with Marcus. Ways that would have ended his threats permanently, but wouldn't have involved the legal system. The implication hung in the air like a threat. Harold's face went pale. You wouldn't have, he said. To protect my family? There's nothing I wouldn't do. I stood up, my patience finally exhausted. Harold, Margaret, I understand that you love your son. But Marcus is a predator who was willing to destroy innocent people to feed his addiction. The only reason he's in a jail cell instead of a hospital bed is because I chose to handle this legally. Jason was staring at me with a mixture of shock and admiration. Deborah, what are you saying? I'm saying that when someone threatens my granddaughter, I become very creative in my problem solving. I turned back to Harold and Margaret. Marcus is alive and facing justice instead of facing the alternative because I believe in the rule of law. But if you think I'm going to help reduce his charges, you're mistaken. Margaret was sobbing now. He's our son. How can you be so heartless? I'm not heartless, I replied. I'm protective. Claire is my daughter. Natalie is my granddaughter. Marcus chose to become their enemy, which makes him my enemy. Harold tried one more approach. What if Marcus gets treatment? What if he pays Claire back every penny and makes a public apology? Then he can do all of that from prison, I said firmly. Actions have consequences, Harold. Marcus spent months terrorizing my family. Now he gets to face the consequences of those choices. Claire stood up beside me. Harold, Margaret, I know you love Marcus. But he destroyed my sense of safety in my own home. He made me afraid of my own shadow. He turned Jason against me and made me doubt everything about our marriage. An apology and some money won't undo that damage. But prison, Margaret whispered, is exactly where people who threaten children belong, Claire finished firmly. Jason moved to stand beside his wife. Mom, Dad, I love you both. But I love my wife and daughter more. Marcus made his choice when he decided to hurt them. Now I have to make mine. The meeting ended with Harold and Margaret in tears and Jason's family more united than they'd been in months. As we prepared to leave, Margaret made one final plea. Jason, he's your brother. Doesn't that mean anything? Jason paused at the door, his arm around Claire's shoulders. He stopped being my brother the moment he threatened my daughter. Blood doesn't excuse everything, Mom. Some lines can't be uncrossed. As we drove away from the house, Claire reached over from the passenger seat and squeezed my hand. Thank you for protecting us. For being willing to go that far. I meant every word, I replied. No one threatens my family and walks away unscathed. Jason was quiet for most of the drive home, processing everything he'd learned about both his brother and his mother-in-law. Finally, he spoke up. Deborah, when you said there were other ways to handle Marcus, I meant exactly what you think I meant, I said calmly. I've lived a long life, Jason. I've learned that sometimes the legal system isn't enough to protect the people we love. I had no idea you were capable of that kind of thinking. I smiled grimly. Never underestimate a grandmother's capacity for violence when her grandchildren are threatened. It's a primal instinct that overrides everything else. Claire was looking at me with new respect. I always knew you were strong, Mom, but I never realized how strong. Strength isn't about what you're capable of doing, I replied. It's about choosing the right course of action, even when you're capable of much worse. As we pulled into my driveway, I reflected on the meeting we just left. Harold and Margaret would eventually come to terms with Marcus's crimes, but it would take time. Jason would have to rebuild his relationship with his parents while maintaining boundaries to protect his own family. And Claire would continue healing from 8 months of psychological abuse. But the worst was over. Marcus was behind bars, his threats silenced forever. Our family was safe, and that was all that mattered to me. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen making Natalie's favorite chocolate chip cookies, while she sat at my table working on a school project about family heroes. The irony wasn't lost on me. Grandma Deborah, can you help me with this question? She asked, pencil poised over her worksheet. It says, describe a time when your hero showed courage. What should I write? I paused in my cookie mixing, considering how to answer. At 9 years old, Natalie knew that Uncle Marcus had done something bad and wasn't allowed to visit anymore. But we'd shielded her from the worst details of his crimes. What do you think courage means, sweetheart? She scrunched up her face in concentration. Standing up to bullies? Helping people when they're scared? Those are both good answers. Can you think of a time when someone in our family did those things? Natalie brightened. When you helped Mommy stop being sad all the time. Daddy told me you were like a detective and you solved a really big problem. I smiled, dropping spoonfuls of cookie dough onto the baking sheet. Your daddy is very sweet to say that. He said you were brave and smart, and that our family is lucky to have you. Through the kitchen window, I could see Claire and Jason working in their backyard garden. They'd moved back into their own house 3 months ago, but they still came for dinner every Sunday. The dark circles under Claire's eyes had finally faded, and she'd gained back the weight she'd lost during those terrible months. Most importantly, she laughed again, really laughed, not the forced smile she'd worn while Marcus was terrorizing her. Jason had been attending therapy to work through his guilt about not recognizing his brother's manipulation sooner. It was taking time, but he was learning to trust his instincts again, and to truly listen when his wife tried to tell him something was wrong. Grandma, why did Uncle Marcus have to go away? Natalie asked suddenly. I set down my mixing spoon and sat beside her at the table. This was a conversation I'd been expecting for months. Sometimes adults make very bad choices even when they know better, I said carefully. Uncle Marcus was hurting people with his words and actions, and when someone hurts people, there have to be consequences. Like when I get timeout for hitting? Similar but much more serious. Uncle Marcus's timeout is very long because what he did was much worse than hitting. Natalie nodded solemnly. Mommy said he was sick in his brain and that's why he was mean. That's right. Uncle Marcus has a sickness that makes him want to gamble with money, and when he lost money, he got desperate and did terrible things to try to get more. Will he get better? I chose my words carefully. He's getting help for his sickness, but it will take a very long time. And even if he gets better, the people he hurt need to stay safe from him. The oven timer went off, signaling that my first batch of cookies was ready. As I pulled them from the oven, Natalie returned to her homework. I'm going to write about you, she announced. I'm going to say that you're my hero because you saved my family from the bad man. My throat tightened with emotion. That's very sweet, but you should know that the real heroes in this story are your parents. Your mommy was very brave to keep fighting even when she was scared. And your daddy was brave enough to admit when he was wrong, and to stand up for what was right. Can I have more than one hero? Of course you can. While Natalie worked on her project, I reflected on everything that had changed since that terrifying night when she'd appeared at my door. Marcus had been sentenced to 8 years in prison, after pleading guilty to multiple charges. The judge had been particularly harsh because of the threats against a child. 3 other victims had come forward during the trial, telling similar stories of manipulation and extortion. Marcus would likely serve the full sentence. Detective Morrison had stayed in touch, updating us on the case and checking on our family's well-being. He'd become something of a friend, often stopping by for coffee when he was in the neighborhood. His experience with family crimes had taught him that the legal resolution was often just the beginning of the healing process. Harold and Margaret had eventually accepted that their son was a criminal who needed to face consequences for his actions. It had taken months of family therapy and some hard conversations, but they were slowly rebuilding their relationship with Jason's family. They'd moved to Florida to be closer to Margaret's sister, giving everyone some much-needed distance while they processed their grief over losing the son they thought they knew. The back door opened, and Claire came in carrying a basket of tomatoes from the garden. Something smells wonderful in here, she said, kissing the top of Natalie's head. Grandma's making cookies for my school project, Natalie announced. I'm writing about family heroes. Claire met my eyes over Natalie's head, and I saw the gratitude there that she'd expressed countless times over the past 6 months. That sounds like a perfect project, she said. Jason followed Claire inside, dirt under his fingernails and a satisfied smile on his face. The tomato plants are really thriving this year. We might actually have enough to consume for winter. It was such a normal domestic conversation, the kind that had been impossible when Marcus's threats hung over their daily lives like a storm cloud. Now they could make plans for the future, plant gardens that would produce food months later, discuss mundane household projects without fear. How's work going? I asked Jason as he washed his hands at the sink. Really well, actually. I got that promotion I've been hoping for. He dried his hands and joined us at the table. The promotion Marcus convinced me I'd never get, because Claire was supposedly holding me back. It was still jarring sometimes to realize how extensively Marcus had poisoned Jason's thinking. He'd convinced Jason that Claire resented his success, that she was secretly undermining his career, that she was jealous of his achievements. None of it had been true, but the lies had been so skillfully woven into their daily interactions that Jason had started believing them. I'm proud of you, Claire said, squeezing Jason's hand. You've worked so hard for this. We've both worked hard, he corrected. I couldn't have done any of this without your support. It was a small moment but significant. For months, Marcus had driven a wedge between them by making Jason question Claire's loyalty and support. Now they were learning to be a team again. Grandma, can you read my hero essay? Natalie asked, holding up her completed homework. I put on my reading glasses and took the paper. Her 9-year-old handwriting was careful and deliberate. My hero is my grandma Deborah. When a bad man was scaring my family, she made a plan to stop him. She was very brave and smart. She called the police and helped them catch the bad man. Now my family is safe and happy again. My grandma taught me that heroes don't have to wear capes or have superpowers. Sometimes heroes are just people who love their families and will do anything to protect them. I had to blink back tears as I handed the paper back to her. That's beautiful, sweetheart. Your teacher is going to love it. Do you think it's true? Are you really a hero? I considered the question seriously. 6 months ago I might have said no. I'd simply done what any mother or grandmother would do when their family was threatened. But looking around at my kitchen filled with the sounds of normal family life, Natalie's chatter, Claire's laughter, Jason's contented sighs, I realized that maybe heroism wasn't about grand gestures or supernatural abilities. Maybe heroism was about recognizing when someone you loved was in danger and refusing to let them face that danger alone. Maybe it was about using every resource at your disposal. Experience, connections, intelligence, even the capacity for violence, to protect the innocent. Maybe it was about being willing to make the hard choices and live with the consequences. I think, I said finally, that we all have the capacity to be heroes when the people we love need us to be. That evening after Claire's family had gone home, I sat on my back porch with a cup of tea and thought about the journey we'd all taken over the past year. Marcus's arrest had been just the beginning. The real work had been rebuilding trust, healing trauma, and learning to feel safe again. Claire had started seeing a therapist who specialized in psychological abuse. She was learning to recognize the techniques Marcus had used to manipulate her, and to understand that his treatment of her hadn't been her fault. It was slow progress, but she was getting stronger every week. Jason was learning to trust his instincts about people again. The experience with Marcus had shaken his confidence in his ability to judge character, but therapy was helping him understand that even the most perceptive people could be fooled by skilled manipulators. Natalie, resilient as children often are, had bounced back quickly once the tension in her household disappeared. She was sleeping better, laughing more, and no longer worried about her parents' hushed conversations or her mother's tears. As for me, I discovered reserves of strength and determination I hadn't known I possessed. The experience had reminded me that a lifetime of caring for others had given me skills I'd never fully appreciated. The ability to read people, to gather information, to plan and execute complex strategies. Most importantly, it had reminded me that family was worth fighting for, no matter the cost. My phone buzzed with a text message from Detective Morrison. Saw the news about Marcus's cellmate. Problem solved itself. I smiled grimly. Marcus's gambling debts hadn't disappeared when he went to prison. The people he owed money to had long memories and extensive networks. Justice had a way of finding those who deserved it even behind bars. I deleted the message and finished my tea, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. My family was safe, Marcus would never threaten them again, and I had discovered that sometimes the best way to protect the people you love is to become the kind of person their enemies fear. The night was peaceful, filled with the sounds of crickets and the distant laughter of neighbors enjoying their evening. For the first time in over a year, I felt completely at peace. My family was whole, my granddaughter was safe, and justice had been served. Sometimes the best endings are simply new beginnings.